Whoa, hey Val, did you see that? I just took out the entire corpus steam with my Grakata. Man, gotta love this weapon. Just procs all day long. What? Not pork, proc! No, proc! What do you mean, what the heck is proc? Everybody knows what proc is. Proc is, well, proc! Man, did Alan V do something to your brain while you were captured? Proc! Proc is proc is proc! Uh-oh. So what's up people, and welcome to another Warframe video. So after multiple conversations with many new players who had joined the clan over the years, I'm starting to realize that maybe it's good to make a series of videos based upon understanding weapons and how to differentiate them and look at them for modding purposes. Now, I am not an expert in weapons assessment, and so I can only give the bare bones basics with regards to understanding weapons, but I thought I would make a video series. And the reason I'm making a series of videos rather than one is because I feel there is such a complex understanding of weapons that it will take more than one video to describe all of this stuff. Anyway, for this video, I wanted to start the series by talking about status effects for weapons. Now, this may be a very unusual topic to start the series with, and I mean most other videos that talk about the basic stats of weapons would usually start with something like the base physical damage stats of a weapon. However, I wanted to start with status effects because it basically influences all of the other damage stats of a weapon. So even if you started with base physical damage stats of a weapon, it's really hard to fully explain it if you didn't understand the principles of status effects. Okay, so although Val is still a little bit upset over the last mission, she said that she would be willing to help out with this video, and so she'll be riding along and coming along throughout this entire video. Okay, so let's get started. So what exactly is a status effect? Well, simply put, the status effect is a secondary effect that comes out from any damage that a weapon may produce, whether that be physical or elemental. Now, as you may know, there are three basic types of physical damage. They are impact, puncture, and slash. And in addition to those, there are the base 4 elemental damage, which are fire, toxic, cold, and electricity. Finally, when you combine two elemental damages, you could get additional types of damage, which include viral, corrosive, gas, blast, radiation, and magnetic. So when you hit an enemy with a weapon, whether that be primary weapon, secondary weapon, or melee, the immediate damage that it does to the enemy depends upon the type of damage you have, whether it's physical or the type of elemental, as well as the type of enemy that you're striking or hitting. However, aside from the primary immediate damage that a weapon can do, there are the secondary effects that come from what is called the status effects of a weapon, and they are dependent upon what sort of primary damage that a weapon has. It also depends upon the probability at which your weapon will do a status effect, and so when combined, it will determine for every weapon what type of status effect you have and what sort of probability at which these status effects will occur. Now, these secondary effects may not be any damage sort of effect, and they may be influencing other types of properties for the enemy. For example, they may confuse the enemy into fighting each other. They may also slow down the enemy, and that will depend again on what sort of primary damage you have and the corresponding secondary effect that comes from those primary damages. Now, many players when starting out this game focus all their efforts on the weapon's primary damage and often completely ignore the secondary status effects. And to give an example of just how useful the status effects can be, I'm going to take the beginner weapon, the Mark 1 bow, and I'm not going to give Val any other weapon, and I'm only going to give her one ability, which is War Cry, to use. And with that, she's going to take on one level 80 heavy gunner. And as you know, the heavy gunner is a high armor enemy, and so the Mark 1 bow is particularly not a good weapon against it because it's an impact weapon, which is mostly effective against shields and not armor. But it does have status. I'm not going to describe which status it is, and I'm just going to let her take on this enemy. And what you find is with the right status combination, you could even take a beginner weapon like a Mark 1 bow and take it against a not particularly advantageous enemy like the level 80 heavy gunner and a relatively high level enemy like the level 80 heavy gunner, and just completely demolish it as you just saw here. So what exactly are the corresponding status effects? And so I'll give a list and description of each of the corresponding status effects for every one of the base primary damages that a weapon may have. Okay, so for the base physical damage types of impact, puncture, and slash, the corresponding respective status effects are knockback, weaken, and bleed. So for impact, the corresponding status effect is knockback, which staggers the enemy. So if you recall, for the impact weapon of the Mark 1 bow, as you saw in that demonstration, it knocked back the heavy gunner so that it couldn't shoot at me, and that's one of the reasons why Val could continue on and beat on the heavy gunner, is because of the fact that the heavy gunner was continuously being knocked back and didn't get a chance to attack often. Now, with regards to the weakened status effect from a puncture damage, have you ever been in a battle and all of a sudden you've been hit down and you suddenly see a bunch of yellow flashes glowing around you and you're like, oh my god, what happened? And you're looking at your health and nothing's really going down, so you're like, oh okay, nothing's really happening. Well, that is the weakened status effect, and you've just been hit with that. And what happens is it doesn't really affect anything with regards to your defense or your health, but it does reduce your attack capability by 30% for 6 seconds. So all of a sudden, you're not really as strong as you are in being able to kill the enemy. Now, if the enemy is low enough that you could one-shot them, no matter what it is, then you probably won't see any difference, because even with a 30% reduction in the damage, you're probably still going to be able to one-shot them. But once you get into higher level enemies, all of a sudden when you get hit by one of those status effects, you're finding that it's becoming really hard to kill any of the enemies for a short period of time. Now, one of the reasons that you often see slash type weapons such as blades to be quite popular amongst many players is because of the secondary effect, which is bleed. And aside from the damage that comes directly from the slash attack, the bleed status effect will provide an additional 245% base finishing damage for 6 seconds. So you often see the enemy, or sometimes yourself if you get hit by it, bleeding, and you see your health going down or your enemy's health going down, and that's because the bleed status effect is taking an additional 245% of the base finishing damage for 6 seconds. Now, since it's a finishing damage, it basically ignores all shields and all armor and just eat at the health. And that's one of the reasons why it's such a popular secondary effect, is because of the fact that no matter how strong the armor or the shield is of the enemy, if this status effect gets turned on, its health is going to go down. Now, moving on to the 4 base elemental damage, The corresponding status effects for the 4 elemental damages are as follows. So for fire, you have ignite. For cold, you have freeze. For electricity, you have chain lightning. And for toxin, you have poison. So fire, you often see when you shoot somebody like a grenadier, all of a sudden they ignite into fire and they're running all over the place. And what's happening is there is an additional 350% base damage over 6 seconds. In addition, there seems to be a fear or a panic sort of effect that makes the enemy run around while they're being lit up. Now moving on to the freeze status effect for cold, this is one of those effects that many players most often see, and it's pretty obvious because your enemy suddenly frosts up and they slow down significantly, and it's doing exactly what you see. So the movement and attack speeds are reduced to 50% for 6 seconds during this status effect. Now for electricity status effect chain lightning, you'll often see that the enemy will suddenly glow purple and they'll go into some sort of spastic fit. And what's happening is they'll receive an additional 50% of the electricity base damage for all of the enemies within 5 meters of the target that you hit. And for a short time, they'll also be stunned. They'll look like they've been hit by a taser or something like that. Of course, I've never really seen anybody really hit by a taser, so I'm not sure. But it's kind of what I imagine would look like if they got hit by a taser. Anyway, so you kind of get this dual effect of short stun as well as a group effect where it hits multiple enemies in a small location near the target. Now for toxin, the status effect is poison, and it gives a whopping additional 450% of the base toxin damage over 6 seconds. So the status effect can be seriously significant, and using this you can literally whittle down some of these enemies using a good toxin mod build. So for the combined elemental damage, there are 6 of them, of which I show 3 here: viral, corrosive, and gas. And for viral, the status effect is virus, and that reduces the health of the enemy hit by a whopping 50% for 8 seconds. So you could basically reduce the enemy's health by a half for a whole 8 seconds. And then of course, if you can use other status damages such as toxin or gas or something to further reduce their health, then you may be able to kill even a relatively high level enemy just by using the status effects. Now corrosive is one of those elemental damages that's extremely popular by the players because of its status effect corrode, which permanently reduces the armor of an enemy hit by a whopping 25%. The nice thing about this is that this stacks, so if you have an automatic weapon that's constantly hitting the enemy, it will continue to take 25% off of the remaining armor after it reduces by the previous corrode status. And since this is permanent, you don't have to worry about it coming back. So you could take some really high level enemies, especially the Grenadier, and use this status to take them down relatively quickly. Finally, gas is another really popular elemental damage because of its status effect Poison Cloud. And Poison Cloud gives toxin damage, but not just to the enemy that's hit, but to all the enemies within 5 meters of the target. And what's really great about this is if you take a weapon that has a large spread, or if you strafe a number of enemies with a weapon that has gas, then you could get everybody to start emitting Poison Cloud and they'll stack each other. So let's say you have 5 enemy and you shoot them all with a weapon that has gas. Well, they'll all affect each other, so they'll get 5 times the amount of Poison Cloud damage as if they were alone. So this status effect works especially well within a group environment. So now if we go back to that demonstration that we had with the Mark 1 bow, the Mark 1 bow was equipped with gas, and though the heavy gunner is alone, The nice thing about gas, just like poison, is it goes through armor very well. So between the knockback of the impact weapon as well as the gas, it literally took out the heavy gunner's life just by continuously attacking it. Now the remaining 3 combined elemental damages are blast, radiation, and magnetic. And for blast, you get the status effect knockdown, which is relatively straightforward. Any enemies within 5 meters of the target, including the target, gets stunned and gets knocked down, and so they have to basically get up, and during that time you have the advantage of any enemy that's basically knocked down. Now for radiation, the status effect is confusion, which is similar to the ability chaos that Nyx has. So enemies that get hit get confused and may target their allies for 12 seconds. And this becomes quite a useful status effect, especially for high level enemies who have very strong weapons, because if you can get them to just shoot at each other, then you don't really even have to use your own weapon to kill them. And finally, for magnetic, the status effect is disrupt, which is really only useful for enemies that have really high shields, since it reduces the max shield by 75% for 4 seconds and removes all energy in case they are caster type of enemies. And so yeah, I mean, this is probably the least popular of all the status effects, because shield does eventually come back and it's not as, for example, effective as corrosive is for armor. Now, as far as the probability of how often the status effect occurs, this depends on the weapon itself and its status chance statistic. And so if you look at any specific weapon, you'll notice that there is a status chance value associated with it. So for example, if you take a look at the Cyanoid Similar, although it has a very large elemental damage capability, it only has a 10% base status chance. Now you can modify it with the mods, but of course the mods take a percentage of that base status chance. So with something this low, you're not going to get a significant amount of status effects from this type of weapon. Now in contrast, for a weapon such as the Procs, since it has a base status chance of a large 35%, you could start modding this and building this for status, and if you build it properly, you could get some significant status effects just by using this weapon. So here I show an example of a fully modded Procs build, and as you can see with the various status mods that I put on, I was able to bring the status chance all the way up to 100%. I have one for gas, one for corrosive, and one for radiation. And with that, I can basically take on a significant number of different types of enemies with this particular weapon. So for example, using the gas version of the Procs, I could take on 5 level 100 ancient healers, and of course infested are very vulnerable to gas, and take them on just using the Procs. And again, since the status effects of gas is poison cloud that affects everybody else, then you can literally take down level 100 ancients just by using this secondary weapon and its status effect. Now if the enemy were 5 level 100 heavy gunners, then I could use the corrosive version of Procs to take out its armor, and since there is also a little bit of electricity in this weapon, then that will stun and stagger the enemy while you're taking out the armor. Once the armor is down to 0, then you could even use something as low as the Mark 1 foe with the gas status and take them out, as you see right here. So probability of occurrence is a major factor in the effectiveness of any weapon for status. And if you are going to build a weapon for the status effect, then make sure that the status chance is high, and then use the available status mods to take it up as high as possible to ensure that you have a significant probability of status effects to occur when you're using that weapon in the game. And this finally brings us to the definition of the word proc that you often hear in videos and in the game. And proc stands for programmed random occurrence, and is basically a name to define when the status effect would occur based on its probability. So when you hear someone in the game say that a certain elemental has proc, then they're basically saying that its status effect has suddenly generated. Now what's interesting is these days the status effect itself and the word proc has become interchangeable. So although it's supposed to be only talking about the random occurrence of the status effect, people will often use proc to define the status effect itself. So you would say something like, oh, I got a heat proc from this weapon. So one final note, if there are more than one damage type in a particular weapon, then the higher damage values will have more probability for its status to occur. So let's say you have a weapon that has both impact and slash is like 90% of its damage and impact is like 10%. Then what you'll find is you'll get the status effect from slash a lot more often than you will get from impact. Also, though I have never tested this myself and confirmed this, I have heard that elemental damage has less chance of status effects to occur than the physical damage chance. So something like slash, for example, will have a higher probability for bleed to occur rather than something like fire or ignite. Now this I haven't tried out, but it is something I have heard, and I heard something that is something of the order of 4 to 1, so it may be relatively significant, and I did want to inform this here. Okay, so this concludes this video on status effects. I hope you found the information to be quite useful, and this will be, of course, part 1 of a series of videos regarding weapons and their stats. So I'm hoping that in the near future I will be able to bring up the next video. It does take a little bit of time to put all this information together, but hopefully we'll continue on so that we can make a series of videos with regards to the basic statistics and characteristics of weapons. I thank you very much for watching this video. It's always a pleasure to make these videos for you. If you have any comments and again advice with regards to all of this, then I would definitely appreciate hearing about it, and please post it in the section below. In any case, we'll continue on with this, and we'll continue on with in general Warframe videos in the future. And until the next video, we wish you all the best, and as always, Jaya, nice day everyone.